More absurd wisdom, an apology for Crito, or when two wrongs do make a right. Here's a bas-relief sculpture showing the death of Socrates. Actually, it's after the death of Socrates. Socrates lies on the prison cot. You can see the bars in the window. So this is Socrates' prison cell. Socrates is actually chained to the bed. So he died in his prison cell, and his friends are surrounding him. You can see them weeping. And this man, this is Crito of Athens, who is closing Socrates' eyes. At this point, we have learned about how Socrates' friend Crito tried to help Socrates escape from prison and avoid his impending execution. And by now, you have heard Socrates explain to Crito why he cannot avoid his fate, even though the court of Athens was wrong to sentence him to death. Socrates' death may be unjust, but Socrates will not contest it or escape it. And why not? For paradoxically, Socrates is saying that it is, at least in this case, somehow right to go along with the wrong decision. So perhaps this is the first absurd idea that we will consider. Perhaps, like Crito, you might find yourself frustrated with Socrates or unconvinced that he made the right decision. Therefore, I'd like to look at each of Socrates' reasons for refusing Crito's help so that we can think carefully about each of them. Once we have done that, we will be in a better position to agree or disagree with Socrates and think about how we might respond when we face injustice in situations of our own lives, so that we will have the wisdom to recognize and do the right thing. And along the way, perhaps we can even find a way to prove Socrates wrong some 2,400 years later. In his 2008 essay, Absurd Wisdom, theologian John C. Madial took on the unenviable task of defending Euthyphro against Socrates, taking up Euthyphro's side of the argument after Euthyphro himself gave up, when he said, "Socrates, I am in a hurry and must go now," to end their discussion in Plato's Euthyphro. Following Absurd Wisdom, I have decided to do the same thing for Plato's Crito and carry on Crito of Athens' argument against Socrates, even after Crito himself gives up. Whether I will succeed or not whether I will succeed or not remains to be seen, but I will try. The worst that can happen is that Socrates will show me why I was wrong, and I'm prepared to accept that if that's the case. For if one is going to be proven wrong, there are worse people to do it than Socrates. Okay, here is a map showing the distance, some 800 miles, well, 799 miles from Athens to Syracuse, a possible escape route that Socrates might have taken if he had taken Crito up on his offer. So regardless, after facing the court on charges of blasphemy and corrupting the youth by setting the bad example of questioning the city's authorities and the gods, Socrates faces an additional set of charges in his prison cell now, handed to him by his old friend Crito. Crito makes his arguments as to why Socrates should accept his offer to help him escape to the island of Sicily, which is some 800 miles away, and at that time the site of Greek colonies like Naxos and Syracuse, and avoid the death penalty, appealing to Socrates' feelings as well, as also his power of reason, and third, his conscience. For at one point, Crito tries to guilt Socrates by asking him to consider how his death will affect his friends and family, including Crito himself. And Socrates makes two arguments as to why he should remain in his cell and accept his fate. Let's consider each of them and then see if we can respond to each of Socrates' responses. And here is Socrates' prison cell on the Philippapo Hill in Athens. This is where Socrates had his conversation with Crito, and it's also where Socrates died. The first argument, appealing to Socrates' emotions and family responsibilities. The first of Socrates' arguments follows after Crito's grief-fueled tirade of attacks on Socrates' character, when, in frustration, he accuses his old friend of being a coward, of being lazy, unwilling to make the effort to escape, of being a bad friend, dying and leaving his friends to miss him for the rest of their lives, and of orphaning his sons, for if Socrates dies, his two young boys will have no father. In calm contrast to Crito's excessive emotions, Socrates responds to Crito with even composure, reminding Crito that emotions should never get the better of someone when making an important decision or when someone has something important to do. Socrates was never impressed by strong displays of emotion. Later, at his own execution, he will reprimand his gathered friends for their tears. He will say, I sent the women away chiefly for this very reason, that they might not behave in this absurd way, for I have heard that it is best to die in silence. Socrates' wife Xanthippe and other female relatives were crying, wailing, and Socrates had them sent away because it's better to die in peace. And yet, if Socrates dies, the fact remains that not only will his sons miss him, but his friends too. As for Socrates' wife Xanthippe, I cannot say. There are a number of somewhat, depending on how one regards these things, humorous anecdotes about Socrates' and Xanthippe's marriage and the fact that they did not seem to get along. For example, here is a painting showing Xanthippe pouring a pot of water over Socrates while he's trying to read. There are many stories about how Socrates and his wife tested each other. So will Xanthippe miss Socrates? I don't know, but many people will, including Crito. In addition to leaving his friends and family to live without him, Crito argues that Socrates' refusal to fight back and save his own life will be disgraceful and disappointing in the eyes of the people of Athens, especially those who always admired the way Socrates stood up to authority and those whose self-importance was threatened as a result of his questioning them. This has made Socrates a hero to the people, and by going along with the decision of the very people he used to question, Socrates will be letting all of his admirers down. No matter how you look at it, this multifaceted objection is rooted in Crito's own emotions and the perception or opinion of Socrates in the eyes of the people of Athens. For both of these things, Crito's missing Socrates and Socrates' reputation will continue on after Socrates' death, right? Socrates may be dead, but his friends and family will continue to miss him. It's worth noting that morality isn't really the issue here. For either of these reasons, unless a thing's action is right or wrong based on how it makes other people feel. And that's actually a very good question. Maybe it does. There is another objective side to this objection that stands in addition to considering the emotions of Socrates' loved ones. For feelings aside, Socrates has a responsibility as a father to support and educate his young sons. If feelings count for nothing, and I am not convinced that this is true, what of Socrates' responsibility as a husband and father? But Socrates has a response to this as well. He says that if he does as Crito wishes and escapes to Sicily, he will not be able to educate them any more than he could while dead, because he won't be there to do it. And in response to Crito's accusation of cowardice, Socrates asks why the opinion of the public should make any difference regarding his decision. After all, the public is often ill-informed and has many opinions about many things. Why should anyone pay attention to what people think? In a generation, everyone will have forgotten about Socrates anyway. Just let some time pass, and it will no longer matter whether or not Socrates escaped or was executed. Either way, he will be long gone and no longer a concern to the people of Athens. To sum up this part of Crito's discussion with Socrates, Socrates thinks that neither Crito's feelings nor the people's opinion of Socrates after he is dead should affect his decision, because Socrates questions the value of feelings. Socrates does not think that justice depends on feelings, but something else. But suppose Socrates is wrong about this. For, as we all know, feelings do matter, for they seem important when we have them, and they affect our lives. Can feelings, the love we have for our friends and family, for example, not make things worth doing? If so, then Crito's first objection at least stands. What do you think? I would argue myself that Crito still has a case. For even if Socrates' friends and family miss him, they will at least know that he remains in the world, and hold on to the hope that, even if they do not see each other again, either he or they, or both of them, might catch word of one another, think of each other fondly, and continue to love and care about one another, even from a distance. If Socrates dies, on the other hand, he will be gone from the world, never to walk the streets of Athens or speak to anyone ever again. His fire will be put out when he could continue to speak and teach and question a little longer, and benefit the people of Sicily if that is where his escape route takes him. As for the public's opinion of Socrates, we have the benefit of 2,400 years to say that Socrates has never been forgotten, and that he is remembered fondly until this very day. Indeed, the fact that you are in this class right now proves it. Socrates, the man found guilty and put to death, is the one history honors even now, while the jury and authorities who sentenced him are remembered as the men who killed Socrates, whose vanity and fear of being questioned put an innocent man to death. They may have outlived Socrates, but they are not remembered with honor or respect today, which is why Socrates said that no harm can come to a good man, as written in Plato's Apology. Socrates' reputation was never harmed, but we can't say the same about the dishonored jury that sentenced him to death. Here is another painting showing the death of Socrates. Um, you can see the bars in the wall in the windows, the weeping and wailing of Socrates' friends, and Socrates is about to drink a cup of wine poisoned with hemlock. And so, to conclude this argument against Socrates, I would say that the love of family and friends, the assurance that the people we care about are safe, even if they are not with us, and the good we can do to those who are with us, whether Athenian or Sicilian, are all good arguments that would justify Socrates escaping his prison cell and avoiding his death sentence. The fact that Athens will continue to love Socrates for generations and millennia after he is dead does not in itself justify Socrates escaping, but taken together with the earlier reasons, it only strengthens Crito's case, even if Crito himself gave up on it in Plato's dialogue. The second argument, that two wrongs don't make a right. Socrates still has one more argument left. Sorry, a little technical problem there. Okay, let me try again. Second argument, that two wrongs don't make a right. Socrates still has one more argument left against Crito, because he thinks justice comes before all. For through wisdom and reason are we able to understand and recognize what is right, independent of our emotions, such as love for family and or friendship. Refuting this will be the most challenging part of our discussion, but doing so will give us the strongest argument against what Socrates says in the Crito. Crito leaves Socrates in his cell to his fate at the end, while Socrates is satisfied that he is doing the right thing by staying and going along with his death sentence. However, because my aim is to take up Crito's position and continue the argument after he gives up, I must now consider what I would say to Socrates' argument that to refuse to submit to his death sentence would be unjust. And before we do, I wanted to share this painting that I discovered just last week. Philosopher with a mirror. I think the philosopher is Socrates. The nose looks like Socrates' nose, and he has a beard, so I think that's him. Probably in his prison cell, given the setting, and you can see the torn clothing the philosopher Socrates is wearing. Painted by Giuseppe di Ribera, painted in the 1620s. And I just discovered this painting, and I quite like it. Here is the argument Socrates makes. He reminds Crito that he, that is Socrates, made a willful choice to live in Athens, and choosing to live in a place means accepting its customs, traditions, and laws that come along with that. Socrates chose to participate in Athenian society, and when he was put on trial, he was given a chance to make his case in court, which was his right as a citizen. And Plato's Apology attests that, indeed, Socrates got his day in court regardless of the jury's verdict. Therefore, Socrates says he is obligated to accept the court's decision and abide with his death sentence. To refuse now would be ungrateful and hypocritical. One might compare this to people who threaten to leave the country if they don't like the outcome of the election. The electoral process is part of being an American, after all, so being an American sometimes means abiding with decisions one does not agree with. Anyone who did not agree with his or her sentence might as well follow Socrates' example. Prisoners could escape. Thieves and other criminals who felt justified by their deeds could similarly reject their sentences, just as Socrates is being asked to do by Crito. Socrates notes in Plato's Crito that Athens has been flourishing the past 70 years, and Athens' laws and courts are largely to thank for this. To disobey the city would be to question the very system that makes Athens such a great city to live in, and that would set a dangerous precedent. And here is another painting for you. It's Destruction from Thomas Cole's Course of Empire series. It's a series of 5 paintings showing the rise and fall of an imaginary civilization. It's a really cool series of paintings to look at. I've provided a link in the course module so you can look at them. One thing I do like pointing out, um, in the series of 5 pictures, there's one thing that's the same in all of them, and that's this mountain with the rock perched on top of it. That's in every painting, but in the foreground, in front of the mountain, a city is built and then is destroyed. Anyway, this imaginary city shows us the possible lawlessness that might result if everyone followed Socrates' example and, escaped from prison after they were put there. Socrates' reasons for staying in prison and accepting his execution hinged largely on the idea that 2 wrongs don't make a right. Socrates may have been tried and sentenced unjustly, but this does not give him license to take the law into his own hands and rescind his own death sentence. For the court's decision was legal after all, and if the courts have no power to sentence criminals, if criminals are free to ignore or reject sentences they do not like, then there can be no justice, and the city will fall into the same anarchy we see in this painting. The first thing I would do in reply to Socrates would be to invoke the power of time travel and call Martin Luther King Jr. from 1963. Thanks to his letter from a Birmingham jail, we are able to listen to his words on the question of justice, as he himself had been arrested and put in jail on April 3rd of that year. His crime? Protesting the then current segregation laws in Birmingham, Alabama, that put black people in economic, educational, political, and social disadvantages. Here are 2 photos of King, taken over a decade apart. He went to jail more than once for this cause. While in jail for the next 9 days, King wrote his famous letter where he argued to his critics that people have a moral responsibility to break unjust laws in order to effect positive change, arguing that what is legal is not always what is right, in contrast to what Socrates said to Crito. King tells us in his letter that there are 2 types of laws, just and unjust. He goes on to say, and I will quote him, I would be the first to advocate obeying just laws. One has not only a legal but a moral responsibility to obey just laws. Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. I would agree with St. Augustine that an unjust law is no law at all. King says that we can know the difference between just and unjust laws by asking whether or not a law that uplifts human personality. If it does, then, let me read that again. King says that we can know the difference between just and unjust laws by asking whether or not a law uplifts human personality. That should not be there. I will fix that. If it does, it is just. If it doesn't, it is unjust. So by arguing that human beings can recognize injustice, even when it is the nation itself that is being unjust, we can actually be just in defiance of the law when the law is not just. And any law that undermines the dignity of a human being is such an unjust law, segregation being one example. If governments can be unjust, then Socrates needs not remain committed to the idea of respecting its decisions if he has the opportunity to make a choice. This is especially true if it means allowing an unjust sentence to be carried out. For if the court was wrong to sentence Socrates, then it is wrong for Socrates to aid and abet the court by permitting the sentence to be carried out. In addition to this, I think we can also return to Crito's first appeal to Socrates, the more personal one where he argues that, as a good friend and as a father to his sons, Socrates cannot go along with his sentence, for he will fail all the people who love him by allowing himself to die. We can do this by questioning Socrates's or anyone's priorities. Are we called to be citizens first, or good friends, or parents? Should Socrates prioritize his duties as a citizen over his duty as a father or friend? Especially if the state is unjust, should Socrates put his loyalty to an unfair state ahead of his love and responsibility for his sons? Perhaps by remaining alive, teaching his sons, and setting a good example for them, he could ensure that Athens will have a brighter future, for his sons will be better citizens as a result of his care and instruction. In the final words of Plato's Apology, when Socrates concludes his address to the court after being sentenced to death, Socrates tells the men of Athens to look after his sons. So this was something he certainly thought about. So by being a good father in his final years, perhaps Socrates can serve the city better than he could by dying for its court. Further, if the authorities and leaders of Athens would only take the time to listen to Socrates, they might benefit from his wisdom rather than rely on their own short-sightedness. Okay, and here's a digital collage I found by artist Jenna Lex. It takes Socrates' prison cell, the same one we saw earlier, and superimposes a number of images of statues of Socrates. I'll conclude by summing up the two possible rebuttals of Socrates' arguments. The first focuses on the people Socrates will leave behind and their love for him, which Socrates will deprive them of if he dies. Socrates would be justified in defying the court and escaping for the sake of everyone who will miss him. He may not be physically with them, but they will have the assurance that he is safe. Socrates' argument that the public's opinion of him is of no value has been proven wrong by the fact that we continue to talk about Socrates even now. His words enriched the world, and perhaps he could have said and done even more in whatever years might have remained for him. Socrates says that the feelings of these people have no effect on justice, but I'm inclined to disagree. Feelings may not be rational, but they do matter, for they are an important part of being human. Thus, we have some more absurd wisdom with which to counter Socrates' argument. And second, Socrates' duty as a citizen, going along with the court's decision, may be superseded by his other duties as teacher, friend, and especially father. If Socrates has a greater responsibility to his family, then he is justified in escaping in order to teach and care for those who depend on him. And I think Socrates would find this argument more convincing than the first one. Of course, while writing allows us to time travel and visit the past, reading the words of both Martin Luther King in a Birmingham jail in 1963 or Socrates in an Athenian prison in 399 BCE, we cannot change the past. And so, in spite of our arguments against Socrates, we must watch helplessly as Crito leaves the prison, defeated, walking past the jailer, likely not getting his money back, right, because he bribed the guard to get in, leaving Socrates alone to contemplate his approaching death, presumably assured that he is dying for a good reason.